live and or work in the area. There's Kneupper from Texas City. There's Brad Howell from Lodestar Logistics, and there's Tony Jones from Central Freightlines. Tony isn't going to have these folks introduce themselves here in a second, but Tony's not likely to say this part, so I'm going to say it. He works for Central Freightlines, but he's the American Trucking Association Driver of the Year for 2010. That's what his whole and I bet he works harder than most other celebrities. And so much to be said for what he does. So these folks are here to talk about their perspectives on freight transportation, but they're doing it not only as business people, but as people who are on it. So it's about what is happening in this part of the world, and what does freight do for us, and what does it do to us, and as we grow, and as we want to grow around greater Houston, what happens to us? How much do we want, and how do we get there? So so we're here to have a face-to-face discussion. Let's do that. Tony, you want to introduce yourself, and we'll go across here.
Okay. Like I said, my name is Tony Jones. I live here in Kansas City. Worked for Central Freightlines. Been here with them for 35 years. Lived here in Texas City for 42 years. Used to run out of the Texas City terminal one time. We used to have a used terminal here, and then they combined it all together. We're primarily what they call an LTL business, which, we pick up general commodities of all sorts, types, and we move from point A to point B. You'll see our people, you'll see our trucks in the daytime as well at nighttime, because we do an LTL business. We pick up and deliver in the day, and then at nighttime, guys like me, I'm a road driver, we haul it to destinations, wherever that's going to be. We primarily cover now about 48 states in one shape or manner. We interline a lot to cover some areas, but we do California, everything. We're a pretty big company, not as big as we used to be, but we're in the market, so you see us all the time.
My name is Brad Howell. I'm the president of Lodestar Logistics in Houston. In the trade, we're known as a 3PL, a third-party logistics provider. We work primarily with shippers of industrial products. In the context shippers, it's generally people who are producing goods that need to be moved. So we specialize in motor carrier work, in rail and marine activities, with a group of clients that are primarily in the rail sector. We manage about 13,000 rail cars for various industrial shippers. And to kind of parrot some of what Paula had to say in the context of the discussion tonight, these are very, very complex issues that are trying to be investigated in this study. As Paula indicated, a lot of freight moves through this area. This is the largest refining and petrochemical complex in the United States. We're the largest port complex in terms of foreign tonnage, and all of that traffic is trying to move in kind of peace and harmony in the midst of the fourth largest metropolitan area in the United States. The congestion that comes with that brings with it a certain element of tension. And I think we all, as consumers and as residents of this area, live with that on a daily basis. And part of that tension is brought about by the fact that we also live in a time that our city, state, and federal governments are under a tremendous amount of financial tension. So these are very complex issues that are being studied in this project. And one word I would like to toss out as somewhat of a theme for the evening as it relates to freight is fluidity. Because whether it is Tony doing what he's doing, or pipeline activity, or marine, or rail, the key driver in all of these questions is how do we keep the stuff moving fluidly. And I think a lot of the discussion will probably end up in one form or another speaking to the issues of fluidity of freight. So, thank you.
Doug Kneupper. I'm a licensed engineer in Texas. I work for the city of Texas City. I've worked in other cities in the area for about 23 years now. And I'm going to come to you with more of the aspect of the roadway, the over-the-road kind of stuff. That's what we see. That's what we get involved with. Although Texas City is certainly interested in the pipeline networks, in the rail networks, in the shipping side of it, it's the roadway stuff that we probably have more influence over. Texas City's kind of blessed. It's been in place for right at 100 years now. If you've heard of anything or seen any advertisement, we're celebrating our 100-year anniversary in September. So that's given us an opportunity to put a lot of the infrastructure in place for some time now. We were blessed with the, I don't know what it was before the highway department, but we've got a pretty good network of roadways in place. State Highway 146, Highway 3, the Gulf Freeway, FM 1765, FM 1764. So you go to other places and you don't see that kind of network of good thoroughfare roadways in place. You may see a crossroads of some 2-lane FM roadways, but the kind of infrastructure we have, it takes a long time to develop it. The same with the shipping. We've had a ship channel in place for many years. We had to build a dike to protect it from the currents of the Galveston Bay system. So we're kind of blessed to have a lot of the base infrastructure in place, and it's got some capacity to grow.
Thank you. So what we have here is you've got to actually have a cross-section of this type of activity. You've got you have Mr. Howell, who arranges how goods get transported, what things have to be done, and who has to have it done. You have Mr. Jones, who actually does it, who actually carries the things from place to place. And you have Mr. Kneupper, who's busy looking after the infrastructure and the network here. So the perspectives here are going to cover the gamut that we have to be able to cover. And each one of them has had a set of questions from us, and I'm going to begin to introduce those questions and ask them to comment. And we'll ask them to interact a little bit as well on those things. And as you hear things that you want a little elaboration on, jot them down, and we're going to gather. We won't go terribly long, and we'll gather those questions up, and we'll make sure that the things that have crossed your mind get discussed as well. So, gentlemen, first question for you is here. What are the most significant freight facilities and roadways that are either from the perspective of your business or within your jurisdiction? And why would they be the most significant ones? Now, facilities here, roadways are straightforward, but facilities can be ports, they can be rail terminals, they can be distribution centers, any operation like that. Doug, would you care to start on that?
Certainly, most significant facilities. You can start with the ship channel. I'm not exactly certain if it's 40 and being deep into 45, or if it's 45 being deep into 50. But that kind of a deep water facility is got to be major, coming in right off the Gulf of Mexico. Roadway facilities, again, like I was mentioning, I say Highway 146 has got to be huge with its ability to get truck traffic north up to I-10 through Baytown, up to other locations, other facilities, and then the Gulf Freeway, Interstate 45. Probably not so much going south. Galveston's probably got some need, but not much. It's probably going into Harris County, into Houston, and then points farther north with that infrastructure system. Locally, we got to get stuff out of the production, out of the manufacturing areas. The plants, I guess, is the primary source for that. State FM 1765 probably sees a lot of traffic, and a facility we call the South Loop, Loop 197, probably gets a lot of traffic kind of away from the plants up to the 146 to the Gulf Freeway area.
That's a good set.
I have much the same view. I will start with the port, be it the Port of Houston or any of the area ports, particularly Port of Houston, given the fact that it is the economic engine that it is, and the fact that the port supports the whole refining and petrochem complex that is along the port. The movement of freight in and out of that, and the jobs that it creates and supports is critical. On the road network side, you know, we're blessed as a region to have ample roads, at least in points of the compass. In terms of capacity, I think is where the question mark comes in. I think from a rail perspective, we are lacking sufficient infrastructure for the amount of activity that takes place in this region. Some of that capacity may just be underutilized, but the major UP yards, Inglewood, Settegast, up in Houston, are major clearinghouses for freight, and the movement of goods through those individual yards is critical to the movement of rail traffic in the region.
You know, well, the thing I've seen over the years here in Texas City is, at one time, Central Freightlines, when we had our huge terminal down here in Texas City, we were actually the premier carrier because everything was regulated. And then as deregulation hit, more and more people started coming in. Well, the piece of the pie kind of shrunk up. So you don't have as many freight companies per se in Texas City, but they all service Texas City, but they do it from Houston. Usually 146 is a hot road, 45. But 146 especially because you also halfway between here and Houston, you have also part of the Houston Ship Channel, which is Barbara's Cut.
Yeah.
Major container. And for years, that's all we handled. We had lots of, down on 5th Avenue South, we had all the industrial complexes. We hauled containers in and out there. I mean, Texas City is really, really accessible for freight either way. A lot of tank trucks. We not only have 197 South, but now they've opened up the north with the projection that we thought we were getting another port, you know, that's coming to come off that end, but it hasn't developed as yet. As me and the planner were talking earlier, where that's sitting. But yeah, Texas City's really, I mean, as far as being able to get in, get out, and all the right access roads, you know, coming in on 1765, going down through the middle of the plants, or 197 on the south side, and not a lot of residential areas, so you're not getting a lot of hype on the traffic and all that. So yeah, it's real accessible.
You think it's pretty good for moving around?
Oh yeah, really. I mean, once the people coming in probably don't know the areas, but once they get here, you know, and like I brought Gary down here today, and I knew with the way they had mapped him to come in and the way I brought him in, it was two different things, because he'd still be up here trying to get around Jack in the Box.
That's the way it is with that stuff,
So,
isn't it?
but I mean, that's, you know, that's just part of it. And, oh yeah, Texas City is a great place, because you can get off at 146 on the south side, come in on 197, you come in on 1765 and immediately go down or go right between the plants. The residential areas aren't there, so yeah, it's really accessible. And there's still have a lot of warehouses in here too, don't we?
Yes,
down on 5th Avenue South, and the plants and all that, so it's, you know, it's good.
So that's a diverse set of things. They're talking about, you've got local roads because you have to get in and out of the places. You've got some of the major thoroughfares that run north-south to a degree out to the west. And you also heard about facilities that aren't here but whose activities are important, like some of the rail yards that are up in Houston, and some of the in the other parts of the port as they interact here. What that really means is in Texas City, like in other parts of the region is actually a big whole, and all the parts have to interrelate. We have good parts here that feed other things, and other things feed us, and so we need to maintain that perspective as we think about what to do next. The next question I want to talk about has to do with bottlenecks and hotspots within this region, and which ones would stand out in your mind, and why is that true? What are the impacts or effects that they might have? But I want to describe bottlenecks and hotspots are certainly physical things, like an intersection with a lot of congestion would be that kind of thing. But I also want you to bring up things that might be institutional. Institutional might be the way the public sector and the private sector interact, or it might be the way public agencies interact, or it might be the way private entities interact, like they're the people that have to serve the port. And you're familiar with trying to string together a whole bunch of people to get something done. So you can have bottlenecks in those things as well. Brad, would you like to start this one?
Sure. I think in terms of physical bottlenecks, wouldn't surprise anyone that sits in traffic getting here or anyplace else, that our road network is certainly a bottleneck in and of itself, and not attributable to the things that Tony does. I'm a very strong advocate of a pretty significant modal shift from truck to rail. But that said, from somebody who's in the trucking business for 47 years, and we will always need to have trucks. The modal shift that can take place is a drop in the bucket compared to what the motor carrier industry does. That will always have to exist. But the road network in and of itself is a bottleneck. And then looking at kind of the institutional things, and this is hearkening back to my opening comments about there are always trade-offs, and there's a certain element of tension in the coexistence of the movement of freight in a community. I'll take rail, for example. We need to keep in mind that we're served primarily by two very large railroads, the Union Pacific and Burlington and Santa Fe. They are fierce competitors, and they do the best that they can to take care of their customer base. That does not always mean that they play in the same sandbox well together. So those sorts of institutional things, from an outsider's perspective looking in, you might think, well, why don't we make more efficient use of some of the assets that are on the ground? Well, those assets in most cases are private assets of those individual companies, and they're going to utilize them, kind of as they see fit. In a broader political realm, I think some of what we see in our business is certainly no malfeasance in the political realm, but the area that this study is covering is a very, very large area with a broad political constituency as well. And I think some of the things that we see in our business is that many times the various political entities, be they at the state level or local level, become somewhat siloed in their viewpoint. And so they are looking at their perspective on the areas that they control. And from an outsider looking in, if we could take a little bit more of a holistic approach, and that's an overused term, but a little bit more of a holistic approach to things, a broader based view on issues, I think some of those political institutional barriers could be broken down.
Tony, what do you think?
Well, trucking is a whole lot different than rail, like he says. Brad's saying two competitors, and we're talking 22 competitors, and everybody's wanting a piece of the pie. Traffic congestion starts up and all that, and everybody, ours is time sensitive like anybody else's. We try to be first on the street, first to the customer, first to pick up, get it back, because everything's moving by. And we work with the railroads because we haul a lot of their stuff, containers and what have you. So the trucking and the railroads need each other. It's just that I haven't seen a train pull up front of Walmart yet. Now, that don't mean it won't happen tomorrow, but as we were talking earlier, I mean, it all moves by truck. And the key for our struggle is with the traffic congestion and everything is, we're still there dealing with the general public. And you got to be able to do this as swift and as safe as you can. And that's part of all this project. What Gary's doing here is teaching people how to share the roads with trucks, because they don't understand that, that 60 mile an hour going down the Gulf Freeway and somebody cuts in front of you and stops, it takes 347 feet to shut that thing down. That's over the length of the football field. So, our people have to be trained, especially out of our area, hauling hazardous material. That's another big thing. And our people have to be trained in hazardous material, what to do, how to pick it up, read the bills. I mean, everything's laid out for you. By no means am I an emergency responder, but I know how to react to the situation, and that's what we try to teach our drivers. So as long as when you're in these communities, you're going in and out 1765, you're going through neighborhoods, you're going by schools, coming up 197, and the traffic congestion, getting back to it. If you went out Palmer Highway at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and there you are decorated with all these placards, and you're sitting in traffic out there at Palmer Highway 146, which is a major major congestion area at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It's best that you've already trained your people that there's another way out of Texas City besides Palmer Highway. You know, but sometimes go up on the North Loop or go down to the South Loop, come right on out, and then you're on the freeway in normal congestion, because placards on trailers scare the daylights out of pedestrians. Dangerous, poison, you know, you name it, you know, but they're as safe as anything else in these trucks if they're handled properly, and that's part of our job as, you know, as freight companies. But Texas City, we're very lucky in this area that we have alternate ways in, alternate ways out. I mean, there's a lot of congestion at certain times of the day. You just don't come at them times of the day, or you go another route. I mean, we're so lucky to have 197 South, 146, Highway 3 is another easy way out. It's you know, we're very, very blessed to have what we have in Texas City with all that we do have. So basically, that's about all I can really think of to say. But I would tell people, if I had a trucking company myself and I was running people down here, Palmer Highway would not be where I'd be putting my people at 5 o'clock in the afternoon or 6 o'clock in the morning, because it is. It's very congested. A lot of people going to work don't need that. So.
Doug, should you pick this up?
Yeah, bottlenecks, hot spots. Heard talk about the rail, the surface transportation, roadways. With the amount of rail that we have and the roadways, you've got that inherent conflict there. The grade crossings, they create conflicts, safety conflicts, congestion conflicts. I think that the region, at some point in the past, is trying to take an aggressive role to kind of eliminate as much as possible some of the at-grade crossings and turn them into grade-separated crossings, one for safety, two for congestion and kind of time-saving activities. It's a pretty involved, expensive gesture, but I think it would go a long way. Some institutional stuff. I know there's been a lot of talk in the area about commuter rail. There's not a lot of commuter rail lines. Talk about sharing with the freight rail folks. I think there's kind of an initial, pushback to that. It's like, well, this is our freight rail, and that's what they're used for, and that's what they're needed for. But to kind of share and co-use those lines for some commuter rail, if we could kind of overcome some of those institutional barriers, I think that would help the region out tremendously.
There's a couple things out of what you just heard that I want to underscore. One is we heard a decent amount of expectation of new growth towards rail and a desire for that to happen and nobody overstated that. There was that it's not going to do it's not going to take over by any means. But what went along with that is this concern that the railroads were built in the 19th century, and they're lying right on the ground along with everything else. You put a lot more on them, you might want to separate. A grade separation would be a separation about where the rail track was versus where the road was, so that the cars and trucks wouldn't have to go over the rail line. But there are a lot of places where that happens. It costs a lot of money to do that. So they are indeed bottlenecks, and there are indeed safety concerns, but it takes money to fix those things. The other thing that I want to be sure you heard was Tony picking up on saying we're blessed here in Texas City with having more than one way to get from place to place. Anytime you're dealing with infrastructure, one of the solutions to, or dealing with networks, one of the solutions to hotspots and the consequences of them is to have more than one way to get to a place. If something gets backed up one way one day, you want to have a way around it. Everybody feels that, but you have to allow for that. Your networks, you have to plan for it. That too takes money. Related to that is we're going to get now into a question about performance, and I'm going to start with you, Tony, because I'm going to set up the overall question, but I want to give a twist to you to start with. The overall question is: are there other impediments, so the sorts of things that we've talked about, to the improvement of freight and logistics performance in this region? I want to underscore why do we use that word performance? What the movement of goods is about is trying to get things to you when you need them, so when you go to the shop, it's there. And you go down to Walmart, you want to be sure that there's something on the shelf, like it's always, like there always is. But half that stuff showed up last night, so it has to get brought in all the time. And the businesses that are here, the refineries and the other kinds of businesses, they're depending upon the entire transportation network to help their businesses go. And how well that works has a lot to do with how well their business works. So things like performance matter. So with that as a setup, so you've heard the questions, but I'd like you to start by telling us a little bit about what kind of deadlines you're up against and why. Why would one of your trucks be out on the road at 5 o'clock on Palmer Highway, or maybe they're trying to avoid, but why would they be out of rush hour? How come?
Well, the freight business, one of the major problems that we have is putting our people on the street, or getting our people off the street to get them to our hubs, get the stuff broke out and get it going to other destinations. Everybody holds off to the last minute. It'd be nice if you drove by at 11 o'clock in the morning and their shipment was ready. But everybody's calling, they want to pick up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon because they're getting ready to close down at 5. And there you got 10 freight companies all converging on the same place. And they leave at 5 when everybody else does, and now they're in the middle of it. So in Houston especially now, we got more and more pickups now that places stay closed or stay open till 8, 9 o'clock at night. But all that does now, it delays what time the road drivers start moving. It plays a big role. And it'd be nice, I mean, you go to a house and you can pick up, yeah, you can do that at 8 o'clock in the morning, kind of like UPS does. But when you're dealing with the refineries and these other places, they're working all day long getting their stuff pulled and what's going to be shipped, who's going to take it, and then boom, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, 25 trucks show up down there and everybody's getting a piece of the cake. Now we're all leaving at the same time. It really is a problem.
And you're trying to run out at night to drive from one part of
Right.
Texas to another.
See, we're expected to be there the next morning. You know, if you're not leaving, like I go to Lubbock to show you how my run runs. I go to Lubbock, and I might go from Houston to Fort Worth and drop a trailer to pick up another trailer that's been, you know, what we call bulk break up there. And then I pick it up and go on to Lubbock. Well, the people in Lubbock also deliver New Mexico. That's another 2-hour drive to get it there. I scheduled out at 10 o'clock. If we got guys still on the street picking up freight that's going to them destinations at 9 o'clock, chances are I won't make 10. Now I'm on the highway hauling booty to get on up there. Then I might have to stop in Fort Worth, do the same thing, change out, grab another trailer, because I usually pull pups, 2 trailers at the same time. I mean, it is really so crucial because you're in competition with the other guys that are doing the exact same thing. So people are, I mean, they're running up the same thing we have. So the earliest we get it out, the earliest we get it into break bulk, the earliest we get it to destination, the nicer the customer has. I mean, the guy that's how you build business. That's the only, service is the only thing a freight company has to sell.
A lot of little things have to work right.
But it all has to
Things
work
can go
right.
wrong.
But it's all service when it comes in because you're in such competition, whereas the railroad, there's only 2 of them, and they're banging it out over each other, where we're in competition. And
You're better than they are.
so, well, until they pull up in front of your house or down there at Walmart, we got to work together. But I mean, it really is. It's a very competitive business, the freight business is. And for the congestion area, we're part of the congestion because we're leaving with the freight at the same time. You're leaving to go home. And so we're all out there trying to share the same highway. Sometimes doesn't work out.
Brad, pick up from this and enlarge on the
Yeah,
on the
I'll
performance
probably
question.
take a little
What
bit
stands
of a rail approach since we just
Well,
heard,
no, to think of the overall issue about what we have to do to perform better.
From a quantitative perspective, and again, independent of mode, I'll get back to the original comment of fluidity. We've got an awful lot of stuff to move in this region. And because there is so much of it, it's like throwing a rock in a pond. If you jiggle that supply chain just a little bit, it has a ripple effect throughout the entire area. Many of you may recall, and this goes back over 10 years, when the Union Pacific took over the Southern Pacific, and there was a great degradation in the quality of their service, of their performance. That could be traced back to the fluidity in one particular yard in Houston. and that ripple effect spread throughout their entire system on somewhat of a nationwide basis. What we need to do to perform better in many cases is learn more about kind of what the other side does and how they do it. And I don't mean that to sound overly simplistic, but I'll speak to a rail example. This is a very problematic area of the country for the railroads to serve. A lot of people have probably heard about the operations of the Port of LA Long Beach that primarily bring in a lot of container traffic from the Pacific Rim. Those containers are thrown onto double-stack trains, clear the port, get well west of LA Long Beach before they're broken down into subsequent movements. And it's nice to look from kind of the outside looking in, why can't we do something like that? And increase performance, increase fluidity. And when you kind of step back and take a look at it, this is a fundamentally different marketplace than most other areas of the country. In railroad terms, this is primarily what's known as a manifest network, meaning that there are a huge number of disaggregated points of origin where freight is being tendered. It is not like an LA Long Beach where you've got this massive pipeline of stuff where you can kind of grease the skids and make it move efficiently. I think if the shippers understood more how the carriers work, the sensitivities on the driver's side, I know exactly what you go through and I'm very sympathetic with that. Every shipper wants their trucks all shown up at 8 o'clock in the morning, as an example, and it just can't happen that way. At the same time, you can't move trains through the area when it is a very, very labor-intensive and work-intensive process to gather that freight. So if shippers understood more about how the carriers worked, and frankly, I think in many cases, the carriers don't do the best job that they can really understanding their own customer base. The trucking industry would be a distinction to that. Because of competition, because of the number of carriers that are out there, you better know your customer inside or out because the next guy is a phone call away. And that's not meant as a swipe to railroads or the marine industry. Their challenges are different than those faced by motor carriers. So I don't want to sound overly simplistic, but I think in many cases, understanding what either your vendor needs from you as a good customer or what your customer needs from you as a good carrier can go a long way, and it doesn't involve spending money. In terms of spending money, the impediments, and again, I'll use a rail example. The Texas Department of Transportation just a couple of years ago published a study indicating that just this region, this same H-GAC service region, was going to require about $4.3 billion of additional rail infrastructure, really kind of now, to maintain fluidity of the rail network. Well, nobody seems to be pulling out their checkbook to do that, even if they had the money in the first place, which is a secondary problem. So there are certainly some capital expenditure items that can improve performance, and I'm sure the same goes on the motor carrier side because you're traveling on public access ways on the roadway. But before you spend money, I don't know that we have fully optimized the supply chain that we have. And a lot of that can come by better understanding what the other side is doing.
Yeah. Well, regulations really stopping the freight industry because they're getting regulated from both ends. I mean, driver-wise regulations are changing. Now we have the Clean Air Act and all that's going on, and the companies got to keep up with the new products coming out. Of course, the share of the pie is dwindling because there's more and more companies coming in. And yeah, it's big on freight. I mean, it's changing times are hard to keep up with. It isn't the same as it used to be when we were regulated in Texas for so many years.
20 years from now, we'll be saying the same thing.
Well, yeah.
But it ain't like it used to be, 'cause life is like this. Doug, would you care to pick up on this subject too, from your perspective?
Yeah. Performance and improvement of performance. I see a benefit from embracing technology in the roadway system. There's signalization that is out there, and it slows down and messes with every roadway. But there's techniques, there's synchronization and things of that nature that could help improve the capacity and the performance of roadways. There's dynamic message signs. You can get that out there and warn motorists or direct motorists to different roadways and things like that. GPS technology that I think a lot of people embrace already that could help get folks around more efficiently. They know where their destinations are, get there a little quicker. Another big area, when you talk about performance and improving these systems is just build more. For roadway stuff, you build more roadways. Maybe it's the same for rail and the pipelines. If you look at what the infrastructure and the systems that are in place now and trying to build all of that in today's conditions, today's environment, it would be probably impossible with one, the cost of everything, and two, the regulations, the environmental regulations that just seem to be endless. I don't know that any of these things could be built today like they were years and years ago. So if it's some movement, some relaxation, a little bit of some of those regulations could occur, I think you'd be more inclined to expand the infrastructure to help the performance side.
So we have some things we can do and some things that kind of stand in the way and kind of overhang a lot of things. Money, so whether there's enough and where it'll come from and what we should put into. I want to remind you just a little bit, because I want to do this just because there was a lot of sort of freight industry talk, if you like, and I just want to remind you why that was there. When they talk about needing to get things delivered and taking care of their customer, in the end, the customers do. Because everything that you've ever put in your car, other than your kids, was brought in by somebody like this from someplace else. So in the end, that's all being done. Some people supplies to. And in businesses that you may work in or that your neighbors do, they need that to keep going. So that's why all of that stuff makes a little bit of difference to you. But the last question that we've got has to do with the effect of all this stuff on the communities. And the question is, what kind of mitigation strategies are available to soften the impact of freight on communities, and what kinds of sustainability strategies are there? Now, sustainability can be thought of as air quality or carbon reductions, that kind of thing. But you can also think about it as, what does it take to be able to keep the system going so that 30 years from now we can still do it? This question fundamentally is about admitting that freight brings a burden to a community as well as a benefit, and what can we do to soften the burden? Now, you have very different perspectives, so let's make use of that. Brad, I'd like you to start this, if you don't mind.
Yeah, this may be somewhat of a shotgun approach. Just as you were posing the question, the Texas legislature is in session kind of as we speak, and these are difficult economic times. And TxDOT, Texas Department of Transportation, is the entity responsible for the construction and maintenance of the roadways in the state of Texas. And as we speak, the budget for TxDOT is effectively being gutted. Part of the sustainability of the roadway system that we all use as individuals and as consumers, and certainly that the Tonys of the world use to move freight, there is a modicum level of funding that has got to be maintained just for maintenance purposes. And I think the folks at TxDOT have questions right now if even those very fundamental base level of funding are going to be available to them, at least over the next couple of legislative terms. The absolute grants that come from the state of Texas to TxDOT are down. The amount of bonding capacity that TxDOT has for new roadways is down significantly. So that that maybe is a roadway issue. On the rail side, if you go back to the founding of Houston, the city seal has a locomotive engine on it, and one of the first kind of buzz lines of the city was where 17 railroads meet the sea. Well, we don't have 17 railroads anymore, but we do have all of that infrastructure, and that infrastructure is there and has been there, and now you have the fourth largest metropolitan area that's grown up around it. So there's certainly a lot of discussion out there about grade separations, not only the safety elements associated with that, but the congestion and the emissions impact that the grade crossings have. This is a non-attainment area from an air emissions perspective, and it's critical, again, for fluidity reasons, to try to address some of those issues. That all comes with a price tag. And again, those are largely private assets that we can't, as a community, just expect the railroads to do those grade separations out of the goodness of their heart. They have got their own shareholders to worry about, and their own financial returns that they've got to protect. On the marine side, I think it's equally complex. There is a national trust fund that all ports pay into to keep their infrastructure dredged. The Port of Houston is a net payer into that fund, and I will not remember the exact numbers, but for every dollar that the Port of Houston pays in, we only get a fraction of that money back, meaning that those funds are being disproportionately spent elsewhere in the country. And if we cannot keep the Port of Houston, ports of Texas City, any of the area ports dredged to sufficient depth, that has a direct and detrimental impact on economic development in the area. And we are looking at that in the context of a time frame when the Panama Canal is being widened, and these area Gulf Coast ports are going to be competing very vigorously with other ports in the nation to pick up that increment of traffic that will now be able to flow through the Panama Canal in 2014, and yet we're doing so in a political environment where every dollar that we're paying in, we're not even getting a full dollar back. And so that is a political constraint to our sustainability. So that's kind of comments on three modes.
Okay. Tony, would you pick this up from? So the question is about mitigation of the effects of freight movement on a community. You can, first, just to give you you can take this however which way you'd like, but one part you might talk about is what your company does on fuel economy, because what you do with fuel economy has a direct effect on emissions.
Yeah, and then of course so much of it is regulated now too, with the Clean Air Act and all that, and so many states have already, communities are doing it on their own, a no idle rule over 5 minutes and that kind of stuff. So they're equipping their equipment with CPUs at the cost they run anywhere from $9,000 to $10,000 per unit, and the parking areas and stuff where that used to be, you had 100 trucks sitting there idle, and that's no longer can they do.
Explain to these folks what that means, because they don't necessarily know what you're talking
Well, you go into these places, and so many of them, you got rest areas and stuff, these major rest areas or truck stops, and you have 150, 200 trucks sitting there, they're all idling, burning that diesel and the smell and the soot and the smoke and all that stuff. Well, a lot of your truck stops now have even went in now where they have piped in air conditioning. When you pull in, you shut down, the thing goes into your window, and it's, but they're far and few between. So they come out with a deal, it's called an APU. It's just like what you have on motorhomes and what have you. They're attached to these trucks. You're actually burning diesel going through them, but it's in a much cleaner state, just like a generated system on the back end of your truck that pumps in air conditioning. And that way, the idle on your tractor, you're not burning all them emissions. You're on a large capacity. You're still burning, but not on a large capacity. But that's a big thing that they're coming to now. I mean, it's a major complaint, of the Clean Air Act and all that these trucks just sitting in traffic. Some of them trucks are sitting 5 minutes. You get some of these traffic jams in 5 minutes, your truck shuts off.
I mean, these are complications that the freight companies have really it's a major challenge for them because the regulations are going faster than the companies can keep up. Now, the new trucks and stuff are coming out now, this clean air truck and stuff. Really, Volvo and Mack and Freightlines, they've really made some headway on these things where it used to be you get 4.5, 5 miles a gallon. That was a great truck. Well, now these things are getting 9.5, 10 miles a gallon, which is really great. I mean, it's really, when you start to figure the amount of money that's spent on fuel. You know, I fill up my truck on a daily basis, and it costs the company $480 every time I pull in. That's $480. You add another mile to the gallon on my truck, now it's $440. You do that over 700 trucks, that's a lot of companies saving money. So the Clean Air Act and stuff let me back off for doing it. We're talking about the structure of the road. Here's another thing that the trucking industry is being faced with, because when CSA come out, which, believe me, as a truck driver, I love CSA. This is a great thing.
They don't know what that is. They don't want to think.
Well, the CSA, used to be, we used to have a thing that engaged companies called safety stat. Well, safety stat was more of a reactive type situation to where we'd have accidents and these people were being pulled over. You got all these discrepancies, bad tires, you know, it's all DOT related and all this kind of stuff. That's just a quick synopsis of it. Well, safety staff acted after the fact, where CSA, which is Gary, the acronym, Compliance Safety Analysis, it took the place of safety staff. And what CSA does now, it holds the company accountable, they're rated, that holds the drivers. Well, because of CSA, and you have drivers have a lot of infractions, no matter if it's truck related, company related, it still goes on that driver's license. Once he accumulates a certain amount of points, they can't ever fire him. But if a company wants to be insured through an insurance company, the insurance company's going to say, we can't have him drive. So once you get to a maximum amount of points, you're an unsafe driver. Well, it's already affecting our system to where we're already short drivers by the hundreds of thousands. Now this kicks in. So the government, I was just reading this the other day, the government now has proposed that we're going to raise the limit of how much you can carry on the truck. From 80,000, they want to go to, 95,000, I think.
95, something like that. Yeah.
Something of that nature. The only difference is now is you're going to have more axles on the ground. Instead of 5, you'll go to 6. Well, you can accomplish that because you're able to move more freight. But what's it going to do to the structure of the roads? So we're already having, you know, so much problems with DOT they can't even keep up with any of this stuff. So yeah, for our part of the business, for the trucking business, which we're the most visible out there, safety-wise, CSA, SafeStat, all this stuff, infrastructure, fuel, you look at all the things, the regulations, the truck, I don't know how they stay in business. And we're not going away. I mean, we're going to be here forever because, like I say, everything moves by truck eventually, one way or the other. And so we got to do it. I mean, they regulate us to death, and a lot of them are good regulations. Don't get me wrong. I mean, the primary thing is.
You said you like that CSA.
Oh, I love CSA. It cleans it up. When you're out there fighting these roads every day as a driver, and safety is the number one concern. I mean, I was talking to Lisa there earlier. When I used to do driver's education with our company and stuff, I told people when I was training these guys, because so many of your schools, when they train drivers today to get the drivers out here for these trucks, they are taught how to get a CDL. That doesn't take up for practical experience out there on the road. You know how to go down, parallel a truck, get through the thing, go through an inspection check, and boom, you've got your license. Now the real world's going to step out there and have it to you. And the thing of it is when we used to train and stuff, I would tell them drivers, especially when I was doing driver's education classes here with my truck, I would tell them, if you treat everybody on the highway like it was your mother, your brother, your sister, or one of your own children, we'd never have an accident. When you stop and think about that, everybody around you is somebody that you love, and we'd never have accidents. I mean, it's that simple. But when you see what goes on out there on the highways, and the trucks and the cars are trying to share the same highway, and we're all in our own way, and we're complaining about the exact same thing. The two biggest complaints about the trucking industry is the same biggest complaints about the trucks as with the forward. And one is what I call space and visibility. They're either following too close, that's the biggest complaint against truckers. The biggest complaints by truckers is the person that cuts them off. We're doing the exact same thing in two different directions, and that's our biggest complaint. It's, I probably got steered off there, but I get on a roll. I just love safety. But that's the challenges that we have in the trucking
I
industry.
assure you, one of the biggest questions in people's minds around having more freight in the community is the safety question.
Well, I guarantee
That's what you're going
it.
on with.
In the
Yeah.
people here, if you haven't had a chance to go out and get Gary's truck, you're just missing an opportunity. Most people think that guy sits way up there high, he can see everything, and that thing will stop on a dime because after all, they're all air brakes. Every wheel's air brake. Well, it takes 347 feet to stop that thing at 60 miles an hour under normal conditions. When is ever conditions normal? But 347 feet is over the length of a football field to shut that down at 60 miles an hour under normal conditions. But when you go out here and you getting up in that truck, just set up in the truck and you know there's a car over here, there's a truck behind, and look in the mirrors and find you can't see him. That is what that driver goes through every day, times 1,000 or 1,000,000. But it happens all day long. That's what that truck is out there for. You've got to just get up and just go get in it. I did this in '95, and I guarantee it's the best program we ever had. How to share the roads with trucks and cars. Because we're going to have to do it. It's never going away. So
have a look, and Doug, let me give you a chance to talk. So this question is about mitigation.
You know, the infrastructure is aging. There's professional organizations from time to time. They'll put together a report card on the condition of the infrastructure. And I don't know that I've ever seen one on anything that's been positive, whether it be, you know, the water or the roadway or whatever kind of infrastructure we've got. It seems like they're always looking for more ways to maintain, to keep the infrastructure, roadways, whatever it is, in good condition. A big problem is funding. Like Brad had mentioned with the ports and the ship channels, with regard to gasoline taxes and the Federal Highway Administration, Texas is what they call a donor state. We send more money up to the federal government than we get back. I think we should probably be lobbying up there on a consistent basis to get that number higher, where we get a higher percentage of the money we actually, the citizens of Texas, pay in. Get us a higher percentage back so we can do more work on the infrastructure, the roadways. There's a big funding category that's called congestion mitigation and air quality. Maybe you adjust that, put more effort into that category instead of just building more roadways. The maintenance aspect, the congestion mitigation and air quality aspect. And then there's, in the same vein of funding, I know people or agencies are beginning to get a little more creative with the way they do that. The state some time ago passed some new laws, or I guess it was a referendum on how to fund some bonding capability that the state can get into now. There's a technique where they go to the locals and they put more accountability at the local level. You know, so-and-so, you want a road? Well, okay, we'll help you pay for it, but there better be some performance. We're going to measure the performance, and if it doesn't meet it, then you're going to end up paying for the road. If it meets the threshold, then we'll pay for it. So, just get out there and look at creative ways to fund the infrastructure, to fund the maintenance, to fund the improvements.
So we have some questions here for you. I'll emphasize one thing, which is this the increase in or the improvement in the miles per gallon on the truck. But actually, trucks have been around a long time. But the truck you can get today is so much better. The truck you can get just 15 years ago. Not only emissions, but
just
it's like taking a car that was getting 15 miles a gallon. Now you're getting 30. You're not spewing as much. It's just as bad. And there are, it's one of the things that makes a lot of difference. You have more of that stuff that you're getting. It's good to know that you're not throwing as much into the air as you might have in the past. Now we got a set of questions, and I'm going to go through as many of these as I can. And first is, with the restructured economic conditions, or restricted economic conditions, I'm sorry, and with all the agencies being impacted, which everybody is, will we be able to pursue collaborative cost-sharing strategies? And will they be considered when the math makes sense and they can be implemented for the improvement of goods and commerce? And are there examples of this that we might point to? So this is about ways for basically public-private partnership. I would characterize this, and I hope that's accurate for whoever else that question. So there are ways for the public and private agencies, our institutions, to be able to work together to get something done together that we couldn't otherwise do separately. Want to?
I'd say absolutely, and it does take place today. In fact, even with the TxDOT's funding issues, I think the Harris County Toll Road Authority is looking much more aggressively at private funding of toll roads. That is a model that's followed elsewhere in the world. And it really almost goes beyond public-private partnership and really just private investment in things that have historically only been funded in the public sector. Also, on the rail side, I know there was the comment earlier about commuter rail, and there are examples of public-private partnerships on that. It is certainly a private right-of-way that we are talking about if we're talking about putting commuter traffic on a freight railroad, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen in a collaborative manner. It generally just happens, though, with some sort of a quid pro quo sort of arrangement. In the Houston market right now, we're looking very hard at taking part of the 290 corridor, what the railroad's called the Hempstead line, and converting that into a commuter rail line in return for public money being used or being provided to the Union Pacific for them to add infrastructure to their network elsewhere. And so that is certainly a creative use of financing. Those are dollars that the UP might not have spent otherwise, and in return, the general populace very well might get a commuter rail line out of it. So those are just two examples that are kind of taking place as we speak.
Good. Doug, do you have anything you can point to either that you know of around here or that you've heard of?
Recently, there's been a major attempt at a public-private partnership to invest in some shipping container improvements. Private company out of town came in, looked at some facilities here, and the city needed to be involved and partner with them and kind of help with that to some degree. So, it kind of ran into some hard times or some difficulties or whatever. But I see that in the future, that the absolute need for public-private partnerships to improve on some of these freight movement techniques.
And the freight world is one part of the world where some of this can get done. It's not immense, but it helps. The next question is a different kind of question. Could off-peak operations, in other words, delivering after hours, picking up packages, could they help with congestion? And what shippers are already offering or operating off-peak? And there's the person asking the question thinks that H-GAC and Kroger and some of the petrochemical plants may or may not be doing this. The question is really, can more of this happen? You familiar with that?
Yeah, and we also have some of that in our business. We have a big contract, well, so many of the companies do, with Michelin Tire in Houston, Texas. And 90% of that is evening time pickups. The key to it is with us, because everything is based on delivery time when we pick up. And the shipper has to be, that participates in that is going to have to be willing to know that we can't hold up our trucks until 4 o'clock in the morning, start leaving for 8 o'clock delivery 600 miles away. And that's what Michelin does. I mean, we pick up trucks, we got trucks going in and out of our terminal up there, and other companies at the same thing. And Michelin is primarily the biggest one I know that we're involved with, but to mention H-GAC, I mean, they're like Kroger and everything. That's 24 hours, but nighttime is their biggest time too for moving their products to the grocery stores, because that's when their stockers and stuff. Walmart's another one that moves on time schedules like that.
Would you say from your perspective that you're seeing more of this than you used to?
From my perspective right
Yeah.
now, yeah, we
Yeah.
see more of it.
How long ago did Michigan make a change?
Oh, I'm not sure when they made the change, but I know in Houston at night, we're bringing in more and more trailers at nighttime where I used to be hauling this stuff, come in during the daytime. But it's changed probably over the last 5 or 6 years. A lot of people are going this. I mean, it's the same with, if you could get all your shippers on board with what they're trying to do with their employees. How many employees now have their employees coming to work either an hour early or an hour late? They're changed the way their day is. We could have shipping pick us up, delivered the same way. Of course, then once everybody catches on, where you at?
Well,
We're back where we were at.
Well, no, you got a lot of capacity you use. It'll take us quite a
Yeah.
while to get back to where we were.
But
That's
it's-
what we got to deal with.
But I know they're struggling with it. I mean, the congestion and more competition and stuff. So.
Brad, are you seeing some of this with any of the folks you work with?
Not to be a skeptic, but I think the longer I'm in business, the more examples of inefficiency I tend to notice.
Well, bring us up.
In the petrochemical sector, for example, and this would certainly be the case in Texas City as well. Most of these plants, by their very nature, are producing their products, whatever that product may be, kind of in equal daily quantities. A reactor doesn't know whether it's Tuesday or Sunday. It's cranking along, and yet the movement of goods, unless it's going by pipeline, doesn't move in equal daily quantities. And some of that, kind of harkens back to my earlier comments of both the carrier and shipper communities not necessarily being completely sensitized to one another. In some cases, the plants choose not to bring the personnel in on weekends to actually cut the paperwork to tender the freight. And without the paperwork, the carrier can't pick it up. And so you generally see a big increase in rail activity on a Monday that you didn't see on a Sunday. Well, that doesn't have to be. That's a function of how you staff a job, both on the production side and on the carrier side. Take the ports, for example, largely for work rule reasons. They work during largely daylight hours. Well, they're 24 hours in a day, and I think we've got lights in a room like this that we would know what time of day it was if we chose to work into the night. So I think a lot more efficiency can be squeezed out of the infrastructure that we have, independent of mode. A lot more efficiency can be squeezed out if we get a little bit creative and are willing to either park our egos at the door or park any old ways of doing business at the door and are willing to take a fresh look at things.
Can I follow up on this? I mean, we've talked about some of the reasons why it doesn't happen because of workforce issues. What about the fact that more and more of these facilities, and especially the pickup and delivery of the consumer goods, are located in neighborhoods? What do you do with the noise factor there? I mean, is that a limitation that you see?
Well, for me, quite honestly, to answer on that, because I'm not involved in the pickup and delivery, I'm over the road and stuff, but what have you, but I'm sure it's an issue. I know there's places in Pasadena that our trucks aren't even allowed. That's day or night. I mean, they're just not going down through there because of the noise level and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, you look what's going on in Galveston right now, the hassle they're having over opening the port, one of the biggest factors they got is noise level. Is what they're writing in the paper, the noise coming out, the trucks and all this. I mean, so I don't know what's going to happen down there with the Galveston with their port.
Well, and just, for example, in the two main container terminals at the Port of Houston, even though they operate in daylight hours, some of the biggest problems that they have are noise complaints from the surrounding community and noise mitigation efforts that the port undertakes to try to shield the community from those operations. The operations of a port are a noisy endeavor, particularly a container terminal, and so there's always a trade-off. That efficiency could probably be squeezed out of port operations, but at what social cost, if you will? how happy are the neighbors going to be with containers banging together at 2 a.m.? You know, you may squeeze a lot more efficiency out of the port, but at what political cost?
So there's some movement in this discussion. I've got a couple questions now for the relate to safety. First is, outside of truck driver training, what other measures are in place to deal with hazardous material incidents? Would you like to start on that? If you're familiar with the local procedures, and if you're not,
We don't have a lot to
Okay.
contribute on that aspect.
You must know a little bit. Do you know?
Yeah,
anybody?
Lodestar Logistics spent 47 years as a motor carrier operation, and it was a pure hazmat operation. So we are very sensitized to it, and most of the goods that we are responsible for moving is generally a hazmat product. You know, I will tell you, and Tony doesn't need anyone to say this for you, but I'm going to anyway. These guys really are kind of the knights of the American road, and we can't pay them enough respect for the challenges that they face on the road, and particularly when they are hauling hazmat. We always joked around that the guy who's most concerned about safety is the driver, because he's the first guy on the scene of an accident. Safety in the motor carrier side is in most cases driven by regulation and common sense when it gets down to the driver level. On the marine side, you know, we live in a fundamentally different world post 9/11. If you go up and down the port of Houston today, you know, what was largely an open waterway pre 9/11, you can't make a move up there without the Coast Guard jumping on you. If you have a particularly hazardous movement, liquefied petroleum gas or something like that, once they enter the channel, they are under a constant Coast Guard escort, not just being monitored by the vessel traffic systems, but with a physical armed Coast Guard escort at their side. On the railroad side, a lot of it deals with operations and spec of the equipment, specifications of the equipment. An awful lot of work is done by the AAR, the American Association of Railroads, dictating the specifications on rail cars that handle hazardous materials, and particularly those hazardous materials that, by the nature of their hazard class, are not hauled in the motor carrier realm. Products that are generally classed as TIH products, toxic by inhalation. So chlorine, for example, is something that moves almost exclusively by rail and not on the motor carrier side. The safety of that is addressed largely by how the vessel that it is carried in, how that vessel is specified, how it's manufactured, you know, what have you. So, I don't know, those are a few examples.
They'll have, for example, the rail cars will have double walls on them.
Absolutely.
So that if you get a puncture, it doesn't go all the way through. But now you've been talking about prevention, and I'm going to, but we also need to talk about response. And Tony, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think you must know from the
Well, I can talk, you know, as far as the, you know, from the truck driver's side, and a little bit about the company, but, you know, there's a lot of companies, just to be quite honest, there's a lot of companies now that are backing out of the hazard material because of the regulations and what they have to do. When you go in and you're a company that hauls hazard material, not only your trainer has to be trained, your driver has to be trained, the dock workers, even the people in the office that work with the paperwork, because quite honestly, there's a certain way the bills have to be, everything has to be in order. There's all citations when you get out there on the highway. But when you're out there and you're dealing with a, you know, with a catastrophe, or it might be big or small, or even a spill, I mean, you get corrosives. Everything that happens on the highway, let me give you an example, it'll be easier to explain. One night in Victoria, Texas, had a guy run over a chair that fell out of the back of a pickup truck, punctured the hole in his fuel tank. show you the challenges that the company has to go with. I happened to be at safety at the time I got the call. By the time the emergency responder got out there, our driver did everything, that he's supposed to keep people away from it. But everybody's saying, he didn't have placards on, he's not even placard loaded. But the diesel fuel in his truck is a hazardous material, environmentally. When they showed up out there, it was like a fire drill. They had every piece of equipment under the sun out there, going to charge the company, and these are what companies go up against. They got this environmental people out there, and they're picking up everything, and they're charging for every piece of equipment out there, when a bag of cat litter would have did the same thing, illegally. But they just, in Victoria, Texas, they had every piece of equipment out to build the company, I don't know how many $100,000 for diesel fuel on the side of the road. So now can you imagine taking from diesel fuel to corrosive, flammable liquids, these type of things that are really potential dangers, other than, fuel going into the ground. That's, dig a 6-foot hole today, you don't just mop it up, you have to dig a hole. So for a company dealing with hazardous material and the responses to what they have to deal with in case of emergency, if I owned the company, I wouldn't haul it.
Well, but there are a lot of people who do here.
Yeah, there's big money in hauling. That's why the competition started. You haul hazardous material, there's a lot of money in it. That's why companies do it. But you better have your people trained, and we spend a lot of money training our people.
I want to be sure that this question gets, there's an aspect of the question that we haven't gotten out, and I want to be sure for whomever asked it that you get the rest of the story. When hazardous materials are carried, they're identified in the bills that are in the truck. So if there's a problem, it's very explicit what it is that would be involved. And there are phone numbers that are and instructions that go with it about what you're supposed to do when that happens, who to reach and what the hazards are. And the emergency responders in the area, and they're in the fire departments, and they're in your EMS groups. They know what to do. And the companies are well trained about what to do, not just the drivers, but the entire company. And it's part of what the chemical companies expect and demand. So there's a whole set of people who are trained about what to do, first to prevent, and second, how to react to limit the trouble. You had something you wanted to say about it?
Back to what Tony was saying about hazmat training and what you're talking about, we have called an emergency response guy. It has to be in arm's reach of the driver when he's in the roads. And in this book, if the driver, correct on this, if he's not sure what to do, all he has to do is look at the UN number. It will send him to a certain part of that guy. It will tell him what to do, what kind of spill it is, what kind of hazard there is to it. And, they're not just putting this out there and let us run up and down the road. We have to be certified every 30 months. We certify
Oh, yeah, every 3 years.
Every 3 years. So this is not, and we renew our driver's license, we go through a background check. We have to be retested. So really, we're really being recertified sometimes. It's been quite 2 times in 3 years. So, that might go.
Well,
These people go through a lot of training.
one thing that you need to know, though, when we talk about training drivers, and me as a driver being trained, I am not trained to respond to a hazardous materials bill. I am trained to prevent it, for one, and to prevent other people from getting hurt if I do have a spill. The emergency responders, that's why you have placards on the side of the trailers. Them placards mean something. That's for emergency responders. When they get there, they know what the guy's got on his trailer. They can distinguish, and then there's certain procedures I'm supposed to carry because I have to have the bills within arm's reach. The first thing that we teach our people, and what I do if I have an accident or something, the first thing I do is grab the bills. They're the most important thing at the scene of any accident, whether you have a spill or not a spill. You hand them over to the emergency. They're the people that are trained to clean this stuff up or deal with it. The driver isn't. His responsibility is to make sure that he protects the scene and keeps people away. And hopefully he doesn't have the accident to begin with. And that's what we try to teach.
Yeah, so all of that.
But a driver, by no means is he qualified to be out there cleaning up this stuff. And some of them will think they are. Believe me.
Keep people out of the way, you've done a good job.
You know, all you want to do is, for money wise, paint is one of your biggest things that's spilled out here. Yeah, chances are. Can a driver clean it up? Yeah, probably. Should he? Probably not. But when you think of the expense of what it costs to bring somebody on scene and unload a trailer that the paint's, 3/4 of the nose up in there, yeah, they try to do their things, but we should be.
I need to stop. There are more questions than we got to. And all of the questions that you posed that we haven't gotten to, we will actually get answers for and get them posted. I tried to go through what I got to based on different handwritings so that I got different people. But I will, but everything that was asked, we will get an answer. So I'm going to stop here. I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking our panel.
Thank y'all all for coming. We appreciate your good questions. We will be getting to those. I think by the end of next week, we should have everything posted on the website. Information here. We'll have video and audio of our different panels. So if you didn't quite catch it the first time, you can rewind and listen to it again. There is a lot of great information handed here and at our other panel discussions this week. So thank you all for coming.